For most of World War II, Germany had enjoyed having the largest and most advanced fleet of submarines at its disposal. The fierce U-boat wolfpacks terrorized the Atlantic for months, forcing the Allies to play defensive games with convoy systems. Being the undisputed king of submarine warfare, the Kriegsmarine saw little use in developing midget submarines like other nations were doing, with the British and the Italians leading in creating miniature submersible ships. But as the Allies cracked the German Enigma Code and their ever-evolving navies began to hunt down enemy U-boats while shifting the balance in the Battle of the Atlantic, Germany lamented not pursuing the technology earlier. With an Allied invasion looming over the horizon, limited resources, and a weak navy, Germany then threw everything in its power into developing its own midget submarines in a desperate effort to use them against the incoming assault. The result was the BIBER submarine, a tiny, one-crew torpedo-armed submarine that would have to face the most impressive amphibious operation in history. Submarine warfare. During the war, the Kriegsmarine didn't have the most capable submarines. That title belonged to the US Agato-class and Belau-class vessels used in the conflict's later years. Germany also didn't have the fastest nor best armed submarines. Those belonged to the Japanese submersibles carrying Type 95 torpedoes. Still, the Germans had the most submarines, building close to 1,200 units during the global conflict. They also had a formidable submersible doctrine that they had been polishing since World War I, known as wolfpack tactics. Their vast numbers, rigorous doctrine, and aggressive combat behavior made the German U-boats one of the most dreaded threats during the war. So much so that Winston Churchill would later write, quote, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." The wolfpack's advantages helped them dominate the Atlantic, but they also made Germany overconfident and over-reliant in its fleets. And as the Americans and British developed much more powerful and sophisticated submarine and anti-submarine solutions, the wolfpacks eventually transitioned from hunting to being hunted. Germany continued building more of their proven Class 7 and Class 9 U-boats, and they abstained from experimenting with midget submarines as Italy and Britain did. The smaller submarine sought to provide a cheaper and stealthier solution to submarine warfare, especially when fighting close to the coast. After it became clear that the Kriegsmarine would not triumph in the Battle of the Atlantic, and that the Allies would soon launch a massive invasion of Europe, Germany realized they needed a way to disrupt the landings. Low in oil and strategic resources, the Kriegsmarine was then forced to consider the tiny submarines as a possible solution, venturing to produce their own midget submarine class in just a few weeks. A first iteration. Adolf Hitler knew the assault was coming, but he didn't know exactly when or where the landings would take place. However, he was certain the Allies would deploy thousands of ships. Desperate to disrupt the incoming landing efforts, Germany hastily built a small one-man submarine capable of sneaking through Allied defenses to deliver torpedoes to the landing ships as they unloaded their crafts. The concept was seemingly straightforward. It didn't matter if it was a 2-meter submarine or a 90-meter Leviathan like the Type X U-boat. They only needed to fire torpedoes, so they could sink even the largest Allied ships. As such, it made sense to build numerous cheap, tiny submarines that could overwhelm the Allied efforts. German intelligence could see the Allies assembling a formidable force in the south of England, and Kriegsmarine engineers worked non-stop to deliver their midget submarine as soon as possible. With no time to experiment, test, or delve into minor details, the team based its layout on the design of a torpedo, often glossing over the fact that a human being would be inside the contraption. The vessel would be known as the MOLCH, or Salamander, and it was equipped to carry 2 G7E torpedoes attached externally on either flank of the craft. The submarine was fully electrical and had a limited range of only 64 kilometers, relegating it to coastal operations. It was also a peculiarly slow submarine, only able to reach a maximum speed of 5 miles per hour. The torpedo-like submarine had a simple design. It had a large battery in the front, and the operator sat behind the battery in a claustrophobic enclosure between 2 small trimming tanks. The electric motor was mounted right after the operator, and different tanks that allowed the boat to surface and submerge sat around the submarine sections, leaving absolutely no room for anything else. The MOLCH in combat. After taking every possible shortcut, D-Day came surprisingly quickly, and on June 6, 1944, the new German Midget submarine was nowhere in sight. In fact, it was still being assembled on the factory floor, and it wouldn't be until 6 days later that the first of 393 boats would be ready for action. The Midget submarines were then rushed into combat, with the Kriegsmarine eager to show their effectiveness and favorable impact on the war. However, the hopes were ill-founded, and the MOLCH proved to be a catastrophic addition to the German Navy. The submarines were first used in the German response to Operation Dragoon in 1944. On the night of September 25th, the MOLCH submarines were sent to attack a large group of Allied ships, but the slow and faulty contraptions delivered an abysmal performance, with 10 out of 12 submarines destroyed after first contact. The remaining 2 MOLCH units were soon sunk by Allied warship bombardment off the San Remo coast. Even when the MOLCH was not being sunk by Allied ships, it was sinking itself. The hasty production led to frequent water leaks that, once they reached the motor, would lead to an explosion that would take the Midget submarine to the bottom of the sea. But Germany was not ready to abandon the idea of having its mini submarines. With fewer resources by the day, having a functional and cheap U-boat seemed like the way to go. The BIBER. The second German Midget submarine was developed almost parallel to the first iteration. However, instead of being based on the layout of a torpedo, it was based on the British Wellman Midget submarine. Copying design elements from the Wellman was not the best idea, as the British submarine had also showcased terrible performance and disastrous combat history, and most of the units that made it into battle were captured by the German Navy. Nevertheless, the Kriegsmarine used the British submersible as its inspiration. The new configuration promised to deliver a more reliable submarine than the previous attempt. However, the development of what would be known as the BIBER was also rushed and constrained by a lack of resources. The resulting vessel would be a smaller, less powerful version of the Wellman submarine. It had a hull divided into 3 sections and covered with a sheet of 0.3mm steel and aluminum alloy. Its design, highlighted by a conning tower in the middle section, resembled larger submarines instead of looking like an oversized torpedo. The conning tower contained armored glass windows allowing the pilot to see. Still, the space reserved for the operator was minimal, and the systems were numerous and complicated. To save crucial strategic resources, the control surfaces and rudder were made of wood, and controlling the direction of the craft while looking through the periscope was extremely difficult, resulting in a cumbersome and sluggish movement. To make matters worse, the BIBER lacked compensating and trimming tanks, making it impossible for the submarine to stay at a periscope depth. If the periscope was to be used, the craft had to surface and remain exposed. The BIBER could be armed with 2 external torpedoes or underwater mines, mounted in semicircular inlets on the side of the hull. These made the craft narrower and lighter, allowing easy land transportation and reducing drag underwater, but they also weakened the hull's integrity. A 32-horsepower Otto Blitz gasoline engine powered the BIBER when surfaced, which was selected despite producing alarming carbon monoxide emissions. Several pilots would perish inside their BIBERs when the carbon monoxide leaked into their chamber. Once submerged, the propulsion was provided by a 13-horsepower electric motor, supplied by 3 Type T13 T210 batteries. The limited horsepower translated into a lackluster 4-mile-per-hour underwater speed. A pitfall. As with their torpedo-like predecessors, the BIBERs delivered a costly performance. They were first deployed from Faycamp Harbor on August 30th, 1944, to attack the numerous Allied ships off the Normandy beach. 22 BIBERs were deployed, but only 14 left the harbor due to malfunctions, leaks, and engine problems. Out of the 14 vessels, 12 were lost on their way to the target. Only 2 reached the operation area, but as the astounding failure became known, they were recalled to base. The BIBERs were given another shot in December, this time to sink Allied traffic to Antwerp in the Scheldt estuary. The first attack, occurred on the night of December 22nd, with 18 BIBERs sent into action. However, only one of the Midget submarines returned and reported to have sunk a single merchant ship, Alan A. Dale. Another group of 14 BIBERs continued operations between December 23rd and 25th. Still, they could not sink a single ship, and all of the submarines were lost. As the final nail in the coffin of the BIBER project, an operator boarding his submarine accidentally fired his torpedo into a group of other BIBERs on December 27th, sinking 11 of them. The only 3 surviving Midget submarines were deployed that day, but none of them returned. Ultimately, the German Midget submarines would turn out to be a clear sign of the desperation, disarray, and recklessness the Germans showed as their empire crumbled before their eyes. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed this story, please click the like button and check out our other Dark Documentaries channels, where we delve into some of the most thrilling military campaigns and specific battles that shaped our world today. Stay tuned.